sine and cosine curves. All right, so this is the basic sine curve, and we'll be making transformations to this. But the very basic sine curve has an amplitude of 1. The period is 2 pi. There's no vertical shift on just the parent sine curve here. The interval is 0 to 2 pi. And the guide, so this is what the basic sine curve looks like, one cycle of it. So we are starting at 0, ending at 0, 0 in the middle. It reaches its max and its min halfway between each there. So with those 5 points that we just plotted, that's how we're going to plot every single sine and cosine curve, and then it's just going to repeat forever. All right, so this is what that would look like. So here's my x-axis, my y-axis. All right, so I'm going to make every 4 on the x-axis pi. So it would be the same going backwards. Okay. So my amplitude is 1, so that's the highest my graph is going to get. So I'm going to put 1 here and -1 the same distance going down. All right, so what we want to plot first would be this point and the end point. Okay. So since my interval is from 0 to 2 pi, that's like my stopping and my starting point. So I start at 0 and end at 2 pi. All right, next, I know in the middle, I'm at the x-axis again, so that would be at pi. I know that halfway between, I'm at my max, and since my amplitude is 1, that's my max, so right here. And then halfway between the second part there, I'm at my minimum, so that would be here. All right, so one cycle of this sine curve looks like this. So once you get one cycle, that same pattern is just going to repeat, and you're going to do that for the entire length of your graph, or your grid, however long your grid paper is. All right, so then I will continue to draw the curve here. So really, all you have to do is get those 5 points. All right, let's look at what the very basic cosine curve looks like. So it's similar. The amplitude is 1. The period is still 2 pi. The basic cosine curve has no vertical shift. It also has an interval of 0 to 2 pi. Really, the only thing that's different is the guide. So if this is my x-axis here, cosine actually starts and ends at its maximum. In the middle, it's at its minimum, and those points partway through is where it's at the x-axis. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. I'm going to set up the same thing here. I'm going to make every 4 pi. And my amplitude is 1. Okay, so what I want to do first are my starting and my stopping points. So based on my guide, I'm going to start and stop at my max. So at 0 and at 2 pi, I'm at my maximum of 1. Halfway in between there, I need to be at my minimum. So at pi, I would be at my minimum. All right? And then in that first half, in the middle, I'm at 0. And in the second half, in the middle, I'm at 0. So this is one cycle of my cosine curve. So same idea as with sine. I'm just going to follow the pattern to get the rest of my points. And then just draw in the rest of my cycles here to fill out my grid paper. Okay, so this is how we're going to approach every single sine and cosine graph. So let's look at where we'll find the information if our amp or period or vertical shift or interval is different. All right, so this is the basic form. A is our amplitude. Also, if A is negative, we would have a reflection, and that would be evident in our guide. And I'll show you an example of that here. B is going to tell us what our period is, and our period is 2 pi over B. That's the equation for period. Everything inside the parentheses, so whatever you're taking the sine or the cosine of, this tells you the interval. So what we're going to do is we're going to set whatever inside the interval equal to 0 and equal to 2 pi. And that's going to tell us our starting and our stopping point. D here is the vertical shift. Right, so that tells us how much our graph is moving up or down. So those will help us identify the AMP, period, vertical shift, interval, and guide. Once we have that, we can graph our function. All right, so let's look at a pretty simple example here. The only thing that's different from the basic cosine curve is this 3 out in front. So that means my AMP is going to be 3. All right, my period is 2 pi over B. Here my B is whatever is the x is being multiplied by. So think about this as being 1x. So 2 pi over 1 is still just 2 pi. Since there's nothing being added or subtracted, there's no vertical shift. Since it's just an x here, my interval is still just 0 to 2 pi. All right, and my guide is also going to stay the same. So my guide for cosine, if this is my x-axis, start at the max, end at the max, min in the middle. Okay, so let's get our axes drawn. I'm going to make every 4 pi. All right, now this time I'm going to have to count by ones because my amplitude is 3. All right, so my interval is 0 to 2 pi. So I'm going to start at 0, and since it's cosine, I'm looking at my guide, I'm going to be at the max. And 2 pi is where I end, also at the max. Halfway in between at pi, I'm going to be at the minimum of -3. All right, and then I have my halfway points at the x-axis. So once I have that pattern, just repeat that for the rest of the graph. And now we can draw in our curve. All right, let's look at another example here. So this time I have 2 different things going on. I've got that negative and the 1/2. So my amplitude is going to be 1/2. All right, my period, since there's nothing going on with the x there, still just going to be 2 pi. Still no vertical shift. My interval is still 0 to 2 pi because I'm just taking the sine of x. But my guide is going to look different. So my guide is basically going to flip upside down. So we know that sine starts and ends at the x-axis and is there halfway in between as well. But instead of initially going up first, since that negative sign is there, I'm going to go down first and then up. So that's what the negative does. That reflects our graph over the x-axis. All right? So I'm still making every 4 pi. Now, I'm going to make every 4 1 on the y-axis because my graph is only going to go up to be 1/2. All right, so sine I know is starting at 0, 0, ending at 2 pi 0. Halfway in between, I'm still at pi. Now my first half there is going to go down first because of that negative, and it's going to go down to 1/2 because that's my amp. All right, so my second half here is only going to go up 1/2. So now we would finish pattern for the rest of the grid. All right, and draw in our function. So notice our amplitude is a little smaller this time. It's only 1/2. All right, right, this example, next one here has a little bit more going on. I've got a number out in front, and also, I'm not just taking the cosine of x, there's a 2x in there now. So this means my amp is going to be 2. My period is going to be 2 pi over my b. Here b is 2 because it's 2x. So my period is only pi. Still no vertical shift, nothing being added or subtracted. All right, my interval, this is how we calculate our interval. I'm going to take whatever we're taking the cosine of. So here, it's 2x. And I'm going to take 2x and set that equal to 0, and 2x and set that equal to 2 pi. So here, x is 0. Here, when we solve for x, x is pi. So our interval is 0 to pi. So our starting and stopping places are going to be different. All right, our guide is still going to look the same for cosine. So cosine starts and ends at its max. It's at its min halfway in between. All right. So when we graph this, I'm going to make every 2 1 here. That should get us to our amplitude of 2. All right, so my interval tells me I'm starting at 0, and since it's cosine, I'm going to start at my max, which is 2, because our amp is 2. I know I also end at my max, and since my interval is 0 to pi, this time we're going to be ending at pi. All right, and halfway in between there, I would be at my min, and then at those halfway points at 0. All right, so we would continue the pattern for the rest of our grid. Draw in our curve. Okay, so this time, since our period was only pi, our graph is a lot more condensed than our original function.